This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, kicks off today's show explaining a case in North Dakota that shows a taking of private property and what is currently happening. The show continues with Kansas State University students Karlie Albright and Pachta as they discuss their experience and recent success as competitors on K-State's 34th National Champion Crops Judging Team. Part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Jason Warner concludes the show as they converse about pre-breeding exams for heifers. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show discussing a case in North Dakota with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Roger, what's currently happening in North Dakota?
Well, actually, a really important local court decision in one of the counties in North Dakota has constitutional impacts, and that judge there struck down a portion of the North Dakota storage law, the CO2 storage law, and said it was unconstitutional. That's a big deal.
What part of that law did they say is unconstitutional?
They said that there wasn't a provision that provided for what's known as just compensation when a taking of private property has occurred. And what they were dealing with here was the specific provision in the CO2 storage law that allowed the North Dakota Industrial Commission to authorize carbon storage projects to proceed, even if they didn't get the consent of all the landowners in the path of a pipeline, for example. And what was that if at least 60% of the affected landowners agreed to the project, then the non-consenting minority landowners were forced to participate in a unitized storage facility. And the district court judge didn't like that.
And what were some things that he noted as being unconstitutional and were his key points?
Well, he said that I think a couple of these points are absolutely critical. He said that pore space, P-O-R-E, is private property. And they said North Dakota law recognizes that a surface owner's right to the underlying pore space is a constitutionally protected property interest. Now, that is very, very important because then if you have the injection of carbon dioxide into these pore spaces, that's a government-authorized physical invasion of the property. And that classification becomes really critical because under the Fifth Amendment, a permanent physical occupation of private property is a per se taking. Now, in other words, a taking under any circumstance. And it's regardless of the public benefit or the degree of economic impact on the owner. It is a taking that requires compensation. The court also said that the law interfered with a very fundamental private property right, and that is the right to exclude others from your land. And they said here by compelling non-consenting landowners to allow the CO2 injection, that effectively stripped those non-consenting landowners of that right. And then, as I indicated earlier, the court said that the law didn't provide adequate constitutional mechanisms for just compensation to those non-consenting landowners, and that was a violation of the U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment as well as the North Dakota Constitution.
So what was happening, those 40% that didn't agree to it, was just having their land used even if they didn't want it?
That's exactly what was happening, and that's what the judge found offensive.
What project is currently happening that has brought this up?
Well, the state of North Dakota and private industry interveners challenged this law because there was a major project being undertaken by Summit Carbon Solutions. And there are other projects elsewhere in North Dakota as well as in other parts of the country with respect to carbon sequestration and storage, injecting the carbon into this underground pore space. And there's a lot of money behind this. Now, I think what's going to happen here is that there will be an appeal of this opinion. It will go to the North Dakota Supreme Court. There is no intermediate appellate level court in North Dakota. And if the ruling is affirmed, then the legal and economic fallout will be significant in terms of carbon capture and storage projects in North Dakota and potentially nationwide, because there are other states that have laws similar to this North Dakota provision.
Are there places that there's already CO2 in the ground from this?
There is. There is several other projects. There's a multi-state CO2 pipeline and storage project that's tied to Summit Carbon Solutions. This is the largest of its kind, and I think those would face an immediate roadblock. Now, the inability to use a provision like this, it's called an amalgamation provision in a storage law that was found unconstitutional in North Dakota, will have impacts on other carbon storage initiatives. The Minnesota Power's Project Tundra, which is a carbon capture effort at a coal-fired power plant, I think would also be forced to find new legal pathways to secure 100% of the pore space. It's okay if landowners voluntarily give up their rights, but they cannot be forced to involuntarily lose those rights without being paid for it. And this is going to, and I think it will be upheld by the North Dakota Supreme Court, but these companies will have to find alternative means to solve this problem. And I think the corollary is in the oil and gas area. And in oil and gas, this problem has been dealt with by legislation such as unitization and pooling, where a company like this is authorized to pool a group of properties together. But that would take additional legislation in North Dakota to get that done.
Is there a scenario where these companies who are wanting to use this pore space for CO2 storage would be able to do it where landowners would have to give up their land?
That gets at what I mentioned just a moment ago. I think the way the market will solve this is similar to the way that this issue was dealt with in the oil and gas industry, and that is we use unitization and pooling clauses in leases that allow the grouping of several tracts together. So basically what you would have is contract law deal with this in a little bit different manner. When we think about public domain or eminent domain, that's generally reserved for true public uses, roads, schools, those types of things. But the use of what's known as an amalgamation clause that was in this CO2, 60% equals 100%, for a private carbon capture company, that's a distortion of the market. And it's a giveaway to special interests of the carbon capture industry and its investors. So it's an example, I think, of government failure by its attempt to fix a perceived market failure. And that would be the holdout problem, these landowners that don't want to agree to this. But it does so by creating constitutional failure, the forced taking of private property. And so where I see this going is that contract law will ultimately solve this problem. Contract and negotiation, pooling, unitization clauses in these types of contracts. But the market will have to solve it in that manner. The court is saying you cannot solve it by taking private property away.
So, Roger, as we're sitting in Kansas, and this is a North Dakota case, why do we care what happens with it?
Well, because we care a lot about the energy industry in this country as well as in Kansas. And we have pipelines that are used not just for CO2 storage, but we have companies that want to put lines across properties. That might be a pipeline. It could be an electric transmission line. It could be some type of connection from a wind energy turbine to a point where they distribute that elsewhere. So they need access rights to farmland. Farmers have farmland. And so it's an issue. And what they're saying here is you just can't have a statute that deals with this so-called holdout problem in this manner. You've got to respect property rights. So this property issue really comes up in many, many contexts involving agricultural land, and the companies trying to acquire access rights to land that they don't own. And you may have landowners that are in the path of a proposed project and they just say no. And so this is what's forced these companies to go to the legislature and get a provision like this in North Dakota to deal with this perceived market failure. But the court is saying, no, you can't do it that way. And that's why I'm saying contract law has to solve this problem, not the forced taking of private property.
Roger, what do you think the legislature in North Dakota is going to do, and how might that help frame other states' legislatures?
Well, they'll wait to see, at least I would suspect, they'll wait to see what the Supreme Court says on this issue. And if I'm right and the Supreme Court upholds the lower court's decision, then they're going to have to either amend the storage law or draft entirely new legislation, just simply start over to address these constitutional issues. And there would have to be, in any new law, a clear mechanism for just compensation determined by a jury for any forced taking. And the law would have to be strong. It would have to have a defensible legal foundation for treating CO2 storage as a public use if eminent domain is to be employed.
So, Roger, have there been cases like this in Kansas? When I think about pipelines or storage, I usually think about oil. So have we seen something like this?
We've seen challenges. We've seen a lot of landowners get upset about these things and challenge these types of provisions. We haven't had anything like this come to conclusion. And again, this is not a final decision on the merits. That's waiting for the Supreme Court. But we shall see what happens. And this is an issue. We've seen it with, for example, rail to trails. Kansas has a long history of rail to trail legislation. It's kind of the same thing. Again, you get all types of takings issues with abandoned railroad lines that then get converted to a trail rather than reverting back to the adjacent landowners. So it's really kind of a broad concept. But this one really heightens attention to the constitutional issue again.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. If you'd like to read other articles from Roger, there are a couple of ways you can do that. First, you can go to AgManager.info, select contributors, and then find Roger's name. Or you can also go to his Washburn Law website, which is WashburnLaw.edu/WALTR. I will link both of these in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with K-State students Ella Pachta and Karlie Albright, who were members of the 34th National Champion Crops Judging Team. Karlie and Ella, thank you both for taking the time to join us today.
Yes, thanks, Chevy.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I know you guys are probably pretty excited still coming off of your crops judging win, but before we really dive into that, can you tell me a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, so my name is Karlie Albright. I'm a senior currently in agricultural education here at K-State with a minor in agronomy. I grew up an hour east of Manhattan around the Hoyt, Kansas area. Growing up, raised on a farm, and so I was always involved in agriculture. Became more involved with FFA and 4-H, and then as I came to college, realized I was interested in agricultural education. So a true passion for agriculture with an additional aspiration to help students and be involved in education has kind of helped me to be on this path.
My name is Ella Pachta. I'm originally from outside of Belleville, Kansas, so about an hour and a half from Manhattan, almost Nebraska border. I grew up on a small beef cattle and hay operation, involved in 4-H and FFA growing up, similar to Karlie. Didn't really get a lot of crops and agronomy knowledge until I came to K-State and started really enjoying that. Knew that I wanted to learn more about it. Then I also kind of decided education was a way I wanted to go. Always been really passionate about agriculture and helping students learn, and wanted to share my knowledge with other kids.
I'd also like to mention that Colin Mills was the third member of our national champion team. He is a senior in agronomy, and we were very glad to have him on the team this year and all of the effort that he put in alongside us.
How would you describe your all's experience on the team overall?
I would say definitely some big highlights is the people we've gotten to work with. Dr. Rachel Cott, Sarah Fry, Quentin Bina, and Dr. Donnelly, who continues to assist, are all people that have been very, very supportive and helpful through all of this. They all help coach in many ways, and their constant support throughout it is definitely a high because they are constantly asking what we need, and they're there to answer any questions that we have. They encourage us to be better and give us that motivation to push us. Not only do they do that, but the dynasty that came before us was also a big motivator through all of that. And so to be able to come to the end of our season and be named the national champions as a team is super exciting and something that we are very proud of because we do put a lot of time into it. Sometimes maybe a low I could mention. It's definitely not a low, but balancing a schedule, a busy college schedule could sometimes be a lot. But again, after you put all that time and effort in while you're balancing so many things and you feel that success in the end, just turns out to be another big high.
I also like everything Karlie said is completely true. But I also think the expectation for like success and excellence in that dynasty is really what pushes you and like pushes us both. Like walking into Throckmorton and knowing what the legacy was of the crop judging team, like you were expected to be in there every single day almost for a couple hours. And people would see you, and it's not just like, yeah, we have a lot of honor system type things and like just going in, studying, doing a few sets a day, but like going in to talk to your coaches every day or like talk to Quentin or talk to Rachel, whoever's in there, and getting their feedback and just kind of like you build that relationship at the same time. So like building those relationships and just getting on the level of, okay, yeah, we're going to win. Like we need to win. Like what do I need to better myself to win? And to get to where we got to this year, I mean, national champions, I mean, we're carrying that legacy on. So, like, the dedication and standard is very high. When you walk into 2501 in Throckmorton, like, you see the cases of trophies, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be there next year or this year. And so seeing that is very motivating, I feel like, and is a fun experience, so...
I definitely think that's one of those things that, you know, Kansas State, doesn't matter if it's crops judging, livestock, meats, whatever it is, that's one of the cool things. And I know from your point of view, it takes a lot of time, but having that legacy of great K-Staters that came before you always sets a really good example. For some of our listeners that may not know, what goes into the crops judging contest? What does that look like?
The crops judging contest consists of 3 different components, for one of which is grain quality. And so grain grading is what that is called, and it's based on getting a sample of grain. There's 8 different types of crops that we look at, and then utilizing the damages and the given damages and all the different factors, including what foreign material is in that. We utilize the USDA grain grading handbook to go through that just as a USDA grader would do and put a quality grade to that, which would be used further through grading.
Another thing on the grain grading too was something that was unique about this year's contest is it was a pre-picked sample. So in the past years, you've gotten like a packet of seed and you dumped it out and like you pick through it with tweezers or whatever, like picking out the damages and stuff like that. This year is all given to us in a pre-picked package. And part of that, the purpose of that, was to encourage other schools to get involved in this because, unfortunately, this contest is a dying contest. And some of those things that happened 20 years ago and the number of schools have decreased. So they changed that this year, which was kind of unique and a bit more challenging, unfortunately. So that was a fun experience. But the next component is seed analysis. So you're given a packet of seed and you're analyzing the weeds that are in it, how much good seed is in there. So you're picking out weeds, identifying weeds. It's kind of like hide and seek ID with seeds. And then our other one is plant seed ID. So there's a 200 set of various plants and seeds, and you're expected to identify them all with correct spelling and no word bank. Do you have anything to add on that, Karlie?
No, definitely a lot of practice is all it takes really to continue to become better at that. It's a lot of repetition and seeing, okay, well, I spelled this wrong. Let's figure that out. Or missed this when I was picking these seeds out for seed analysis. How can I practice taking more time to pick through it so I'm ensuring that I'm picking every little piece out and then identifying it correctly as a prohibited noxious weed or a restricted noxious weed or a common weed or maybe a crop. So all of that goes into seed analysis. And then in those other components as well, it just takes a lot of repetition to continue to get better and take the time to see all the things that they like to throw at you in the contest and just use each one of them as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, it's not something you pick up overnight. It's like we've done it for this is our second year.
What advice would you have for future K-Staters that are interested in joining this team, and what can you guys do or what can future K-Staters do to keep this team going?
I actually had a conversation with a couple kids. I think they're from Minnesota or Wisconsin at the national contest, and they were joking like, what kind of factory do you guys have going in the crops judging department at K-State? So they joke that we just put out so many like high quality team members and students. But one thing I tell a lot of people, especially me as a senior, kind of get sentimental, like don't be afraid to go up to someone you don't know and ask. Like if you really enjoy that crop science class with Dr. Cott, go and talk to her at the end of class. She is like the most personable person ever and loves talking to students, is a great teacher. That's what I did, and that's how I got into it. So just taking that step outside of your box and maybe being different from the people around you. But like also, like at the beginning of the year this year, we probably had 25 kids that were interested in the fall crops team. So like the interest is there here at K-State, and just like practicing. And that's one thing that we do a lot is practice, and we just say it over and over again. I know it gets annoying that we say it, but like going in there and just doing things is what is probably a set, maybe like a roadblock for some people, or someone thinks it's, man, I can't do that. It's too hard. It's not. If you can go and talk to someone you don't know, that is the easiest thing is studying. So getting in the right group of people, I think, is really important, and stepping outside of your comfort zone.
I was also going to ask you guys, you're both seniors in ag ed, so being on a team like this, how do you feel like that's prepared you for your future career?
I think both of us can speak to the experience that we were involved in FFA and 4-H growing up. And so you kind of have that mindset of competing on teams, whether it's a CDE or an LDE or just taking projects to the fair. You have that expectation for yourself of competition. And that's something that we continue to bring to K-State. And this experience has allowed us to continue to grow our knowledge in agronomy and just that competitive aspect as well of what it means to put that time in, while also feeling that motivation. I think for me personally, this is allowing me to gain the knowledge that I can pass on to my students in agronomy and further on, but then also encouraging them that if we set these goals and we maintain that level of motivation, that we will see success. And getting my students to understand that is something that might be a challenge at times, but it's something that I can speak of and an experience that I've had that I hope that I can continue to encourage within them and help them set those expectations for themselves.
Yeah, that's one thing about the crop judging team is the level of expectation that was like expected of us. And I think that's one thing that I will definitely like carry into the classroom to students, and not just for judging teams or LDEs or CDEs, just like their drive and like wanting them to learn. So setting those goals for themselves and like, or like just encouraging a student, be like, hey, you can do it. Like, do you want to learn it? Let's learn it. Like, let's figure out how to do it so you can win if that's what you want to do. So I think it also kind of inspires students a little bit to hear about these, like maybe from us winning a national championship and seeing other schools around us winning things inspires them to think, man, I want to do that. And I think we're both equipped with the tools to help them do that, not just because of the crop judging team, but some of the experiences we've had in our education classes as well.
Thank you both for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you guys so much.
Again, that was Kansas State University seniors Karlie Albright and Ella Pachta as they discussed their recent success with K-State's 34th national champion crops judging team. We are cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead on Agriculture Today.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Jason Warner.
Here in a few months, we're going to start the breeding season, and I'll give you guys the scenario. I've already decided I've saved heifers. I want to get them bred really a month before the cows, which means we're right on the cusp of they're going to be coming into puberty. And should I or should I not do a pre-breeding examination to find out where they are in the process? And if so, what does that pre-breeding examination entail? Bob, I'll go to you first, and I'm going to get Jason's opinion.
Yeah, so to me, a pre-breeding exam is basically similar to our goal with pre-breeding exams of bulls, is make sure that these, in this case, females, are ready to start the breeding season. And I think it's critically important because my emphasis, I just focus on getting heifers bred early. I don't want a heifer that's going to calve in the middle of the calving season. I want her to calve either before the calving season for the mature cows starts or very early in the calving season. And that's because of that longer postpartum interval for that after that first pregnancy. I just want her to get pregnant for her second calf early, and then she's set up for life. So all of this has to do with I want her to get pregnant early. And that really is why a pre-breeding exam has some value. Because if I just want her to get pregnant sometime in a 70 or 80-day breeding season, a lot of heifers will, but they may not get pregnant till later in that breeding season. And I want replacement heifers to get pregnant early in the breeding season. So I want to identify heifers that have already reached puberty by the start of the breeding season or are essentially ready reach puberty right at the start of the breeding season. So a couple of ways I can do that is get their weight, because we know that age at puberty is driven a lot by how close they are to where they are in their growth curve to their mature weight. And we can palpate the reproductive tract, the uterus and the ovaries, and a heifer that's already reached puberty or very close to puberty, her reproductive tract feels a little more mature. There's large structures on her ovaries, her uterus is a little thicker. And so I like a breeding soundness exam for heifers to identify those that are going to get pregnant early. And one of the things, these heifers are worth a lot of money to be sold as feeder heifers. So it's already a difficult decision of how many do I want to keep for replacement heifers. But if the ones I keep, I darn sure want them to get pregnant early. And so I think it actually fits into this period of, well, it's probably true every year, but we've got high feeder calf market prices. Let's only keep heifers that are likely to do well in the breeding herd. And if her job, if she would be better suited to the feedlot, let's make that decision early.
Yeah, so Bob, and I think hit the nail on the head there as far as doing that pre-breeding exam prior to 45 days or maybe 2 months prior to the start of that breeding season, whenever you think the best time is there. But I also think, too, to your point on understanding where those heifers are from a weight standpoint is really important. And so as I think about now for spring calving herds, it's really important to understand where these females are weight-wise and understand what plane of nutrition and program we need to have them on to make sure that they're actively cycling. We've got them well where they need to be going into the breeding.
Kind of a nice thing about doing a pre-breeding exam that includes weight and a track score here, 45 days ahead of the breeding season. If I'm a little bit behind, I can make some adjustments and get them more. Yep. I can, because my target is like, say, 45 days from now when we start the breeding season. I for sure want them to have reached their target weight and be ready to go by then. And by doing this exam a little bit before, and it's not only an individual heifer assessment, it's also an assessment of the group. How has the winter feeding gone on this group of heifers? And so my target is, like 60% of them have already reached puberty 40 days before the breeding season. And then if the group continues on a good plane of nutrition, well, then I'd expect my 80+% to be cycling in 45 days. And so that it requires basically knowing what my target weights are and really kind of assessing where we go, because every winter is a little bit different. I might have kind of planned to develop heifers just like I did last year or the year before, but we had a different winter. We had different feedstuffs, and so it's really good to check in on those heifers a little bit before the breeding season to make sure they're on track to do well.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.